When Mary arrived where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." When Jesus saw her crying and the Jews who had come with her crying also, he was deeply disturbed and troubled. He asked, "Where have you laid him?" They replied, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to cry. The Jews said, "See how much he loved him." But some of them said, "He healed the eyes of the man born blind. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?" Jesus was deeply disturbed again when he came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone covered the entrance. Jesus said, "Remove the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "Lord, the smell will be awful. He's been dead 4 days." Jesus replied, "Didn't I tell you that if you believe, you will see God's glory?" So they removed the stone. Jesus looked up and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. I know you always hear me. I say this for the benefit of the crowd standing here, so that they will believe you sent me." Having said this, Jesus shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his feet bound and his hands tied and his face covered with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Something happened this week, and it kind of changed the direction I thought I was going to go this morning. A friend of mine, Mike McIntyre, we were in high school band together, went to basic training at Fort Knox together. He died. Unexpectedly, just gone. And when I heard the news about this, I tried to remember what it was about Mike that I liked. What about him I didn't like that much? I mean, he was a sousaphone player, so I can tell you something. At least he wasn't a woodwind. Sorry, that's a bad joke. Some of the memories came so quickly. And I remembered those long bus rides. I remembered that train ride up to Fort Knox, entering a world that we didn't know. And I got to thinking, who were some of the other people that I remembered? Thursday was All Saints Day. That day that John Wesley said, "That day I love so peculiar." He loved it. Because he said, this is the day that Christians live for. Christmas, God was always with us. Easter, that's about the power of God. But All Saints, that's where the rubber meets the road. So I got to thinking, there are people in our lives who affect us. People whose actions, whose words spoke to us at a time when we needed it, whose life formed ours. And so I got to thinking, who are those people for me? Well, right away I went to Mrs. Latimer, my elementary school Sunday school teacher. the first adult who showed me the love of Christ in every word she uttered. She put up with boys who had, puppy dog tails and lizards in their pockets and all the rest. But she never spoke to us in a way that conveyed anything other than we were beloved children of God. I thought about Rev B, Bob Britton, back in the 60s. Had a motorcycle. Had a Fu Manchu mustache. He was righteous. And he showed me the joy that comes from worship with other people who are just as messed up as he was. But they came together, and in that moment, they were strong. Yeah, there are those people. If it were not for them, I wouldn't be here. So who do you remember? Who do you remember that has touched your life in a way that, had they not been a part of your journey, you wouldn't have turned out as well as you did? Who are those people who have spoken to you the word of grace when you were anything but graceful? Those people who spoke the word of hope when all seemed lost? Who were those people who spoke the word of life when you were in the midst of death and grief? We all have them. I thought of some other names. Jeff Overstreet, a name that nobody here knows. Back in the day, there was something called the AIDS quilt. It was a massive undertaking. Each quilt was 6 foot by 3 foot. And it filled the National Mall from the steps of the Capitol to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. From the Constitution to forget the other street. Anyway. What? It's big. I was going up and down through this hushed throng of people, and I came upon this panel, Jeff Overstreet from Wausau, Wisconsin. He had been an Eagle Scout. He had been a member of the Madison Scouts, the Drum and Bugle Corps. He had been a member of his local United Methodist Youth Fellowship. And in that moment, he went from being a panel, a name, to my brother. He never knew me. I never knew him. But in that moment, I went from seeing an issue to seeing a person. Who are those people whose death spoke to you and showed you that your life meant something? Who are those people that their passing wasn't just an event, a notice in the newspaper, a service in a sanctuary? Who are those people whose, when you add up their life, was linked to yours? Then I thought, is there more? Wednesday was the 502nd anniversary of the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. It's a day that is more than candy and trick-or-treat or trunk-or-treat. It's a day that says, there was once a man named Martin who said, God is. You think about all the people who have shaped us. In the very earliest days of the church, before it was a church, to be a saint meant you were a follower of the Messiah. You were a believer that Jesus of Nazareth was, in fact, the Son of God. Was, in fact, God. So, all believers were saints. By the middle of the first century, saints had become those who had died, those who had suffered because of their faith at the hands of the empire. By the Middle Ages, saints became known as those whose life, whose actions so embodied the gospel that they radiated holiness so that those around them could feel the presence of God for themselves. Now, our tradition, the United Methodist Church, we don't have saints, not as such. But we have people who have shaped us, who have, by their life, by their teaching, by their simply being present, have shown us the face of God. So I started thinking about who are those people for me? And right away, Evelyn Dibbert, little pixie of a woman. Imagine Betty Lowell with a moped. Evelyn had one in her garage. She never rode it, but she said, I know it's there. Little farming town. She painted her house pink. The only one in town that wasn't white. She had a big script deed on her garage. She said, just in case I ever have too much, and I'm not sure which house is mine. But every Sunday morning, without fail, she walked the 2 blocks to the church. Snow, rain, Nebraska winters. She said, it's only 2 blocks. I can walk that far. Where else would I be on Sunday morning than to worship my God? Who is your Evelyn? Who is that simple soul whose actions, whose belief was lived out in a giggle, in a note, in brownies, or lemon bars, or pot roast? Who is the Evelyn for you that showed you that to be a believer, a follower of God, to be a saint, sometimes it means just showing up. Holding someone's hand as they take their last breath. Saying, you don't have to do anything else. I'll do the laundry for you. Who is that person for you? Whose name wells up from your past? Maybe you haven't thought of that person in decades, but they're there. They're part of you. And because they're part of you, they're part of us. Who are those giants of the faith, whose names you know, that have spoken to you? For some, that might be Billy Graham. If you've ever been to one of his crusades, it was a powerful thing. Mother Teresa for some. Oscar Romero for others. It could have been E. Stanley Jones, that great Methodist missionary in India. Georgia Harkness. These names that we read in our history books, that are part of who we are, go back in time to the days of the Wesleys, to Isaac Watts, to Susanna Wesley. Go back in time to Thomas Tallis. Go back in time to Francis of Assisi or Clare of Assisi, Ignatius, Augustine, Origen, Tertullian. Go back in time to the days of Paul and Peter. Go back in time to walk those dusty streets with Christ. Go back to the prophets. And before the prophets were the kings. And before the kings were the judges. And before the judges was Moses and Miriam. And before them, Joseph and Isaac, Rebekah, Abraham and Sarah, Noah, Adam and Eve. Through it all, through all the years of creation, God has been present, calling us into relationship, calling us that life is more, is richer, is deeper. If we will listen to the voices calling to us. Who are the voices calling to you today? Who are the voices speaking the word that says, God is here? And that God that was at the beginning of creation, that was with all the saints, is present before you. Just occurred to me, I did a clinical unit at Stevensville Memorial Hospital